After taking an episode off, the villains and antagonists came back in full force in Ahsoka Episode 6. We open the episode with a short scene between Huyang and Ahsoka addressing Sabine's choice before getting to Peridea, and I do think it showed a bit of a change in perspective for Ahsoka. Despite the much higher immediate consequences compared to Sabine taking the map in Episode 1, Ahsoka seems as worried if not more worried about the motivations for Sabine's choice compared to the consequences. Huyang, despite his usual dispassionate assessment of their circumstances, supplies that there was maybe no choice at all and no amount of preparation could have changed it for Sabine. I think there may be a thematic connection here between their concern for rescuing Ezra as being a good in itself, rather than part of a cold calculus about potential outcomes, and the New Republic's unwillingness to take any action because of what the implications might be. With the New Republic, they're clearly just burying their heads in the sand, which I think is different from Ahsoka being happy to let Thrawn rot in Peridea like his stormtroopers, but in a galaxy so dominated by destiny, it may just be the case that this conflict with Thrawn isn't a thing that they can avoid, and it's better to do this with Ezra than without him. I'm not discounting the hugely negative consequences that this could have, or really even saying I agree with the choice Sabine makes, but there's at least something to the idea that the death and destruction Thrawn will bring is on him, not Sabine, whereas the choice to help Ezra is one Sabine can make for herself. And Star Wars has often come down to these personal choices made between characters. For example, Vader kills the Emperor to save Luke, not because of the broader political implications or because he thought he was the chosen one. We'll go through the rest of the episode character by character rather than chronologically, so we'll go to Shin and Baylan next. Baylan at first seems intent on keeping his agreement with Sabine, and Shin seems to expect that as well. Baylan justifies keeping Sabine around to Morgan and then to Thrawn not with his agreement, but by saying she's still useful to them. To me it felt like Baylan's insistence there was nothing more than an excuse. It's pretty clear he has his own agenda, and being useful to Thrawn and Morgan is something he sees as a necessary evil to have gotten here, rather than because he personally hopes that the Empire comes back under Thrawn's control. That would just be perpetuating the vicious cycle he sees. His disillusionment with the Jedi's part in that cycle has caused him to throw away not just the Order, but a lot of its teachings, though he does seem somewhat conflicted about the whole situation. Despite finding herself with probably a lot of similar ideas about the Jedi Order, we're seeing a pretty different approach to this from Ahsoka. She's not denigrating the whole Jedi system the same way that Baylan is. In fact, she's running around with a droid who helped raise and train both of them in the temple. And he's even telling her some of the same stories that he would have told them as children in the Order. This, I think, speaks to a bigger willingness to maintain some of what was good about the Jedi, whereas Baylan still cares about those stories, but more in a utilitarian sense, hoping they'll bring him to something that lets him upend the whole system. Baylan did promise Sabine, additionally, that not just would she find Ezra, no harm would come to her. Thrawn is now telling him and Shin to kill her and Ezra if she does find him, and this seems off-putting even to Shin. I can't really tell yet if Baylan has just resigned himself to doing this as part of the greater good, or if he's troubled by these orders as well. A lot of villains end up doing a lot of things because they're working towards a greater good, and this is a necessary sacrifice, which I do think ties in a little bit to the idea of sacrificing Ezra, and how that relates to the choice that Sabine makes. With Shin more generally, we're getting a lot of signs that maybe she thought her master had something more solid to work on, but instead she's in what she thinks of as a wasteland chasing ghosts of old stories which may or may not be true. And on top of that, the conviction he seemed to have in choosing right from wrong, symbolized by upholding his end of the deal with Sabine, isn't really standing up either. All we've really seen of Shin's motivations is that she's trusting in Baylan, and now we're starting to see that some of that trust might be eroding, not because she thinks he sucks or anything, but because she might be starting to learn that, like so many other people, he's a flawed individual. He doesn't have all the answers. She seems almost excited to relate herself to Ezra and the Jedi Order when Baylan calls Ezra part of a series of Boken Jedi trained outside the temple. On top of that respect for Baylan, there's almost a bit of loneliness there and a desire to be part of something bigger. So the question then would be whether what Baylan is working towards is really going to provide that. As mostly a side note, considering the focus on the ones from Mortis and Rebels, especially Ahsoka's connection to the daughter and the connections with the Dathomiri and the ones, the cycle Baylan's describing sounds a lot like what we hear about Abeloth, the bringer of chaos from the Fate of the Jedi novel series and legends, who basically feeds on and into that cycle of war and rebirth. She basically functioned as a servant to the Ones, and then was basically the mother within that family of the father, the son, and the daughter. If Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati are named after two wolves chasing the sun and the moon to begin Ragnarok, that could all tie in together with some of Avalos's details from Legends. There's definitely still a lot to learn with these characters, and a lot of what I'm saying is speculation, and speculation is never worth the Google Docs page it's typed on, beyond just kind of being fun. It was great to see Thrawn himself, though. I think the voice in Rebels was really good, and it's still great here, which I think covers up for what's a less than ideal visual execution, in my opinion at least. We're continuing on with the sinister orchestra behind him, which happened all the time in Rebels, and it matches even better with the deathly looking Chimera and stormtroopers under his command now. Considering what we saw with Merrick, I think there's a good reason to believe that these night troopers he has are mostly dead. Though I think Captain Enoch is probably alive, especially if he's named after the biblical figure often interpreted as having been taken to heaven without dying. Seeing Chimera in live action was almost as cool as seeing Thrawn. There was a lot of discussion about whether it's the wrong variant since it didn't have the typical ISD-1 vertical conning tower, but there is a central spur there which only exists on the ISD-1, and it does have the ISD-1's turrets, so I think it's more just the result of the repairs that had to be done when the space whales took them away. Thrawn clearly doesn't have much time for Baylan, and seems to hope to be rid of both him and Shin before they leave, not just Ezra and Sabine. So we'll see if that continues or if we get more of a Jorah Sabaoth style relationship with him from the Thrawn trilogy, assuming they're ever reunited. We do see the Night Sister coffins, containers, or boxes, or whatever you want to call them, getting loaded into the Chimera from the catacombs, so given the desolation of both Dathomir under the Empire and the pretty empty world here, Thrawn's end of the bargain seems to be helping to re-establish them on Dathomir itself, and we'll definitely get some more undead, which may lead into a nice storyline for Merrin and Cal to be involved in, though I don't expect that to be happening this season. Thrawn's personal plans and stuff related to him I think are going to play out over a longer period, so while I'm hoping for a reunion with Pelion in Episode 8 or something, and a battle with that Home 1 fleet in the New Republic, I think he may actually take a bit of a back seat for the next 2 episodes. Finally, that brings us to Sabine and Ezra. I was hoping Sabine would have a bit more agency in getting herself out, but oh well. Clearly the Night Sisters think that the choices Sabine is making are dangerous to their plans in a way we don't understand yet either. She's obviously a skilled fighter, but so are a lot of people in a way that doesn't necessarily set up a cosmic early warning system. The Howler and the little snail guys she comes across are classic Star Wars creature fun, which is always nice to see. We're clearly heading towards some sort of reckoning with Ezra over her choice too. Whether he'll immediately forgive her or feel like she undermined his sacrifice is still up in the air. He's at least still got a blaster and some chainmail on him, so presumably he's been up to stuff himself, and he probably is familiar to the Raiders. Beyond that, I think he is my favorite of the live-action adaptations so far. The lines for him and their delivery have just been really good, so he registered as "This is Ezra" a lot faster than a lot of the other characters did. All in all though, this was a really enjoyable episode, and I'm looking forward to see what comes next.